All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going on a journey into one of the most complex and honestly one of the most important microbial habitats in the entire human body, the vaginal ecosystem. We're going to explore this dynamic world not just as a part of our anatomy, but as its own living, breathing environment. I mean, really think about that for a second. What if, inside of you, there wasn't just a collection of cells, but a bustling world with its own climate, its own resources, and its own inhabitants, all interacting in this incredibly delicate balance? Well, it's not a hypothetical, it's real, and seeing it as an ecosystem is absolutely the key to understanding it. So, here's our game plan for the tour. First, we'll get the lay of the land, the unique features of this habitat. Then, we're going to meet the key residents and see how they literally shape their own world. We'll look at the changing seasons driven by hormones, explore what happens when things get thrown out of whack, and finally, meet the immune guardians who act as the protectors of this whole system. Okay, our first stop is the environment itself. What is it that makes this particular biological space so special? Well, it really all boils down to these three things. First, it's loaded with a sugar called glycogen, which is basically a feast for certain microbes. Second, it's naturally acidic, which creates this amazing protective shield. And third, it's always changing, thanks to the constant rhythm of hormones. You put those three things together, and you've got the perfect, highly specialized home for a very specific community.
So when you have a specialized home like this, you get some pretty specialized residents. For our next stop, it's time to meet the locals, the microbiome. So who's actually living in there?
You know, to make sense of all the microbial diversity, scientists have come up with these categories they call community state types, or CSTs. You can gotta think of them as different neighborhood types, each with its own vibe and demographic.
And what's really fascinating is what most of these neighborhoods have in common. I mean, look at this chart. 4 of the 5 main community types are dominated by different species of one single hero genus, Lactobacillus. The big outlier is CST4, which is way more diverse and often has more anaerobic bacteria, the kind that don't need oxygen. But in a healthy, balanced state, Lactobacillus is almost always the star of the show.
So let's talk about this number, because it is so important. A pH below 4.5. That is the gold standard for a healthy, balanced state. But how does the ecosystem keep things so acidic? Well, it's all thanks to the little residents we just met.
This slide just lays out the cause and effect perfectly. On the left, when things are in balance, you have a ton of lactobacillus. They're busy fermenting sugars and pumping out lactic acid, which keeps the pH nice and low. But look at the right side. If those lactobacillus populations drop, other bacteria can move in and take over. They don't make nearly as much lactic acid, and boom, the pH starts to rise and the whole ecosystem shifts out of balance. Now, of course, no ecosystem is static. It doesn't stay the same all the time, and this one is no different. It has its own seasons, and they're dictated by the powerful rhythm of the menstrual cycle and all its hormonal changes.
And this timeline shows just how dramatic those seasons are. During menstruation, for example, estrogen drops and blood flow can temporarily raise the pH. Then, as estrogen comes back up, the kitchen gets restocked with glycogen, the favorite food of Lactobacillus. At ovulation, everything changes again to help with fertilization. And then progesterone comes in and makes the mucus thick and protective. It's like a complete reset of the entire environment every single month.
So we've seen this incredible, intricate dance. But what happens when the balance is disturbed? When someone steps on the dancer's toes? Well, that brings us to our next stop, ecological imbalance, or dysbiosis. Dysbiosis isn't a disease in the way we usually think of one. It's more of a state of disruption. It's when the community shifts away from that protective, lactobacillus-dominant state and moves toward a mix that can be, well, a lot more problematic. And here's the thing. Imbalance isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. This table shows 2 common types. On one side, you have bacterial vaginosis, or BV. That's where you see an overgrowth of those anaerobic bacteria and a higher pH. But on the other hand, you have aerobic vaginitis, or AV. This is driven by totally different microbes, aerobic ones that need oxygen, and it usually triggers a much stronger inflammatory response from the body.
But don't worry, this ecosystem is not left to fend for itself. Oh no. The body has a super sophisticated security force, its own team of park rangers, you could say, that works 24/7 to maintain order. And that is, of course, the immune system.
And its defense strategy is brilliant. It's got multiple layers. First up, you've got the physical wall, a thick layer of mucus and cells that are packed together super tightly. Then there's chemical warfare. The body pumps out these special proteins that literally attack invaders. And finally, if anything gets past those first two layers, you've got the cellular patrol, a whole army of immune cells that hunt down and destroy any threats.
But it gets even cooler. There's this incredibly clever strategy called nutritional immunity. The body literally starves out unwelcome invaders. It produces these special proteins that act like magnets for essential metals like iron and zinc, grabbing them and hiding them away. And without those crucial nutrients, the bad microbes just can't grow. It's a simple and totally brilliant defense mechanism.
You know, this quote just nails it, doesn't it? As soon as we shift our thinking away from a simple good bacteria versus bad bacteria mindset and start to see this for what it is, a complex, interconnected ecosystem, it changes everything. It opens the door to so many better, more thoughtful ways of approaching health.
So if there's one big idea to take away from our entire tour today, it's this. Health in this ecosystem is all about balance. It's not about trying to be sterile or killing every single bad microbe. It's about nurturing a stable, resilient habitat where the good guys, the protective community, can thrive and keep everything else in check.
And that really leaves us with a pretty mind-blowing question for the future, right? We are just scratching the surface of mapping all of our body's microscopic worlds. As we learn more, how is that going to change medicine? How could it help us move beyond one-size-fits-all treatments and toward truly personalized care that nurtures our own unique internal ecosystems? It's an incredibly exciting frontier to think about.